Gosh, you're all very punctual. So we'll just give it a few minutes, folks, if that's okay, just to allow people to join the call. Well, just considering how punctual everybody is actually being, I suppose, although the participant number is rising by the second at the moment, but I suppose we may as well kick off and we'll start the introductions anyway. So I'd like to welcome you all here to the first meeting of 2024 for Dairy Women Ireland. We're kicking off the season by focusing on spring preparation. And again, this year we're also supporting the meetings offered by Animal Health Ireland, but tonight Dairy Women Ireland are exclusively delighted to offer you a talk on dry cow nutrition and calf housing to promote calf health. So as you know, I'm Mary Kinston. I'm a discussion group facilitator, and I am part of the Dairy Women Ireland steering committee and president, and I'm running this meeting tonight alongside another steering committee member, Michelle McGrath. We're going to tag team this evening, so hopefully it all works out and things go to plan. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just if everyone can be conscious of their mics, whether they're on or off, and if they're on, if you want to ask a question, just conscious of what background noise we're dealing with. Also, in terms of questioning tonight, there will be an opportunity after every both talks this evening to ask questions. So please think about, if there's any points that you want further clarification on or expanding, or, if there is any other issues you feel we could have touched on or haven't dealt with. But if you'd like to, especially for the first session with Liam, we're quite happy for you to interrupt the talk if you want to expand the point. So either raise a hand, and another one of our committee members, Deirdre, she'll be keeping an eye on the participants. So if you'd like to raise a hand, we'll come to you, or if you'd like to put your questions into the chat function, we'll try and get to them either during the presentation or at the end. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to look at the dry cow diet to start off with. We have Liam Lacey going to talk to us. He's from Inform Nutrition. He's from Kilkenny, also comes from beef and sheep farm, and he's qualified with an degree with honours from UCD in 2013. But for the last 7 years, he's been working with Inform Nutrition as a ruminant nutritionist and technical support to a lot of the products that they offer. So Liam, would you like to take over from me? And I'll ask you to share your screen, and we may as well get on with it.
Yep, thanks a million, Mary, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to come on and speak to you all. And a very complex, but hopefully we'll get through a lot of the questions and answers tonight on the dry cow minerals and nutrition. And by all means, as Mary said, stop at any point you feel and ask a question, because we often learn more from questions that you guys ask than what we can read from books. So definitely ask any questions you can. So we'll share up the screen here now. And everyone can see my screen and hear me okay?
Yes, Liam, we can. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So we're going to just go through a lot of main points on pre-calf nutrition and minerals, and with a small bit then at the end on calf performance on milk and milk replacer and how to get the most out of that. So the topics that we're trying to cover is the benefits from Inform Nutrition mineral range, a small bit on silage mineral reports and how to interpret them, what to look out for, pitfalls and things like that. Small bit on dry cow feeding diets, mineral feeding in general, the transition period, the main focus on transitioning cows from a dry cow to a lactating cow. Some of the costs involved in some of these diseases around calving time, metabolic disorders include milk fever, ketosis, things like that. An action plan to put in place if you're having some of these issues. If you're not, great, it's fine. And then we have a small bit on one of our products, Milkshake and Calf Health, at the end. And as we say, we'll have questions at the end if you want, but if you need to stop me at any point, please do. So the benefits of our Inform range. So we're a manufacturer, and not all people that supply minerals manufacture them. And we manufacture all our products, and we manufacture in a GMP plus a UFOS approved facility, which is very good quality recognition status. That means they're manufactured to a very high standards, and we can only use certain raw materials. So all the raw materials you're getting in your bag from Inform are EU approved and quality tested, especially the magnesium. We quality test all batches of magnesium that come into us to make sure that's fully absorbable to your animals. And that can be quite important. Our range of minerals that go on farm are also molassed, which we physically put molasses on the powder, which help to reduce dust and cosmetically is better for the farmer and the animal, as you don't lose as much to the atmosphere. Following on from that, we have a specific product called Iodex, which is unique to Inform, which is, we'll have a couple of slides on this. It's a unique form of iodine that is a protected source. So it's more available to the animal and it doesn't volatilize as easy. So we have high levels of protected minerals in our minerals and seaweed, and we can come to those and what they do better in a minute. And we have a range suitable for all cow types and whatever you're dealing with, be it regard your silage type or whatever you're deficient in. So iodine is a very important nutrient. Forages are very low in iodine. And iodine by nature is a very volatile element. It's a halogen on the periodic table, and it can interact very easily with other elements and other things. So for example, it can volatilize very easy into the atmosphere. So if you spread it out on your silage, it can easily, on certain types of silage, it can be volatilized and become unusable to the animal. It can react with feed ingredients as well, and it can react even in the bag. So we protect the source of the iodine. If you can manage to get iodine into a cow, it does absorb very easily, but it's getting it in there can be the problem. It's like protected urea. If you spread it on a windy, sunny day, it can be volatilized off into the atmosphere and you don't get your big benefit from it. And then we're with all our trace elements, actually, we're legally obliged to comply with levels. So we can only put in a certain amount. So everything we add now needs to work. Now we can only put in 500 mgs of iodine per kilo of mineral. A few years ago, we could have put in 800, 1,000. So we need to be making sure it all works. Iodine by nature has a short half-life in the body of the cow. It's not stored, so it needs daily supplementation. So it's very important for immune function. It's very important for fertility as well. It's very important for calf health and development of the fetus. So Iodex is a unique product to Inform. It has a combination of a protected source, which is also available in the rumen. So some of it is available in the rumen, and more of it is bound, and it's a bypass source that's released later down the digestive tract, where it is less antagonistic, or it doesn't get broken up by any other antagonist that would be in the rumen. It's freer to be absorbed with less antagonists down the digestive tract. So that's the main benefit for Iodex. So you're getting more out of your iodine that you're using. Just a small bit then on, if anyone has a question on that.
Yeah, just on the iodine front then, Liam. So what would be, symptoms when on farm that you feel that changes need to be made? So obviously you have a protocol to try and avoid issues, but you know, what are the common symptoms that you'd find on farm that
I suppose the
would
classic
make you
iodine
review?
deficiency would be, sorry, Mary, the classic iodine deficiency would be an enlarged thyroid in calves, and when the calf is born, they can give a heg or two and it slowly die shortly after being born.
So a lack
So that
of
would be
thrift
classic.
to get going.
Yeah, and slow to get, it takes a breath maybe and dies. That would be the classic iodine deficiency on farm. Skinless calves, we don't see it as much anymore, but sometimes you could, or hairless calves, sorry, you that would be another symptom, or patches of hair missing. But the classic would be the calf being born, breeds once or twice and dies.
Okay. Or if they do breathe once or twice, are they harder to rear? They, you know,
Well,
could it
they
be
just, you
associated
don't
with?
get a response, or they come out unresponsive. Like there might be a small response in them. You think you're going to get them going, and they just don't respond.
Okay.
That'd be the main symptom.
But if it was subclinical, do you know what I'm trying to say? Would you just see a lack of thrift in the calves? You'd get associated problems. Are they
You would,
the
you'd have
sort of
immunity problems as well. So you'd have
Okay.
immunity problems in calves if you had a subclinical iodine deficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We'll move you on then to forage.
So would you?
Oh,
Sorry.
there was a chat function there. No, carry on.
Yeah. So you have a very good thing to do then would be forage mineral report. So we tend to, any problem farms or any issues with calving in the past, or we tend to go for a mineral analysis for the silage, because it gives us a lot of feedback on what the cow is eating every day and what antagonists could be in the silage locking up important minerals. So we get a full mineral report. And if you have a problem farm with pre-calving hypocalcemia or milk fever, it is important to get the cation anion balance. If we see that line middle ways down, so that is a very important line to get on your report. It tells you the association between cations, which are positively charged ions, and anions, which are negatively charged. So that really is a very important line to show if there is going to be possibly problems around low blood calciums around calving or milk fevers and so on. And how that line is created is how much potassium is in the silage and how much sodium versus chloride and sulfur. So the potassium and the sodium are the positive ions, chloride and sulfur are the negative. So that's really a very important line there. And really, this line has increased dramatically over the years. We would have seen this 7 years ago, 10 years ago. The overall balance will be 150, say. And it's very easy to get absorption of magnesium then when you have a low cation anion balance. So this is not desirable, this high level, but the way we put out potassium and things like that on silage ground, it's becoming a problem to get a good absorption of magnesium into cows. So as we can see, this is the mean of 532 samples. So the mean cation anion balance in this particular year, we're waiting on the 2023 one, but it was very, very high. So that is a major problem, is to try to get good absorption of magnesium in and get calcium from the bone around calving. So we can see other elements then. Calcium is usually pretty high in and good level of calcium in grass silage. So if we only feed grass silage, we're fine. Good level of calcium. Usually phosphorus is good level as well. Magnesium is a bit low for a cow, but we supplement that anyway. And then your trace elements are typically low as well. It also gives you a good indication then of what antagonists, what may be locking up certain elements, like iron, molybdenum would be two classic ones for locking up copper, zinc, selenium, and things like that. So you would be given a good analysis on that report, and it steers you in the right direction then when you want to try troubleshoot problems or find solutions on farm, because you have all your antagonists that are going to give you problems. So is everyone okay with that?
So the reality of that high cation anion balance,
Yeah,
is it seeing a lot more milk fever? I think,
it is.
is it the sales of cows to
Yep,
jet and have gone up
exactly.
significantly in the last few years, and there's a heck of a lot more mag boluses going into cows, as I understand.
And calcium boluses, yeah.
Yeah, sorry,
There would,
yeah, calcium boluses at the point of calving. Yeah, apologies. Yeah.
yeah, there would be, yeah, because as I said before, magnesium is probably the most important element we put into pre-calver bag, right? So that has really gone up in recent years. So before, we would have got away no problem with 15% magnesium because we had way less potassium in the silage. Now we're up on 28. Our top spec mineral is 28% magnesium. So we've had to go way up to try to get the absorption through.
And is this purely driven by the fact that we're trying to get bigger crops of silage?
I suppose purely driven by the fact of that, yeah, there's more potassium. As we can see, we'd like a potassium level in the silage of 1.5 or less, and we're 2.67 here on the average. We typically see over 2, no, easily in a lot of analysis. That causes problems.
Can I ask something? Can you
Yep.
hear me? So
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
you're saying farmers do this in problem situations. Can you do this for farmers who don't have a problem as a preventative?
Of course, yeah, and a lot of people do it as well, yeah. But a lot of the case they have to do this because they've had a problem or they want to solve it. But that's the best way of solving it. Probably is to do a mineral analysis. But yeah, everyone should really be doing one because you don't know from one year to the next what problem could show up.
Just done. We have a question on the chat as well. How do you measure, how do you do a silage analysis when you're using bales from different sources? Do you just have to keep repeating it in terms of the batches?
Yeah, sorry, but that is tricky because it's obviously you'd have to do multiple or a mix and try if whatever you're trying to do is get a mix of whatever the batches are and send it away for analysis. And I suppose it is important that the timing that you do this could take a month to come back. So you'd want to know exactly in the pit or the bale stack where you're going to be roughly around the point of calving because this is all very needed around the point of calving. So if the silage is different at that time, you could be out of sync if you've moved to a
Okay.
different batch, let's say.
Okay, so you need to be basically doing your silage analysis now, but being very aware of where you're going to be in terms of the pit or the bales at the point of calving and the diet that they're going to have.
Yeah, because unfortunately a result takes a month to come back. So you need to be ahead of the game, So you need to really have it done October, really. November.
I find with these as well, Liam, obviously you probably back them up with doing a few bloods in the cows. When is that a good time to do? And is it about building a profile? Like I'm one of these people who always likes to have an animal health folder on the farm, and I just keep slapping all these things into the same place to look at what last year's was versus this year's. Your
as you
thoughts
say,
on that?
you can get a good profile on the system then. But the main thing is the bloods might show good levels of, you get your trace elements and things like that, but it won't show the things that are in this potassium, sodium, things that could cause problems for absorption of magnesium and calcium.
Just when we're looking at that silage analysis as well, you've pointed out the potassium is high, and obviously that's a degree of farming practices, but does it have bearing of the year? So like, are you likely to have a higher presence of potassium, say, available or unavailable if it was a slow cold spring versus, a very growthy spring? Like some things are just circumstantial of the weather.
100%, Mary, that is the case. But unfortunately, year on year, for the last 10 years, we're seeing it increasing, slightly dropping, but the mean has been above 2.3, 2.4 for the last 8 years. That samples that we've done and seen.
Okay. Obviously, in terms also of nitrates and our reduced use of nitrogen, there's quite a bit of a push now towards red clover silage. Obviously, a very hungry potassium crop. You're basically switching out the nitrogen for the potassium. Your thoughts on that in terms of a a feed for dry cows versus milking cows, and maybe what the trends you might have seen of some of the silage analysis you've done on that?
I suppose those those clover types, and especially red clover types, can bring up a lot more. They'd be higher in trace elements, so they have a deeper root. They'd have a better absorbed. They bring up more trace elements, I suppose. But they do. A lot of people do put out a lot of slurry on them, so they can be as bad, if not worse, than normal grass silage.
Yeah, they tend to be a high calcium feed, don't they? So they're possibly better as a milking cow feed than a dry cow feed. But yeah, no, I just wondered. That was fine.
That's what I would be saying.
Okay, we'll roll on then.
Super. And if you have any more that you can think of, you can ask at the end on that one. So just feeding cows before calving then. The ideal thing to do with dry cows is to get them in the optimum condition in late lactation. So you really are just storing them over then in the dry period. And you don't like to manipulate the condition of them in the dry period too much, because when you dry them off, it's very metabolically stressful. So they don't gain condition for a couple of weeks after being dried off. And there's numerous reasons for that. Their feed is cut, their exiting routine, there's a lot of metabolic stress on them, they're stopping milking, so lots of different things. So you try to get them in the optimum condition and maintain them. So this is just a table that you'll have that guides you from condition scores and quality of silage and what you need to feed. So that's silage plus concentrates if you're building condition, and then restricted silage if you're in optimum condition, or if you're in 3 or 3 plus. You kind of, if you're on high quality silage, you need to restrict slightly. So that could be restricting by adding in a bit of straw to dilute the energy of the silage, or if you're actually restricting silage, you need to really have enough feed space for that. So more 1 cow per cube you need to have a meter feed space per cow and plenty of feed space.
Okay, so just to get clarity, so S is basically silage only, SR is silage on restriction, or mixed with straw, again, depending on feed space, and then obviously putting in concentrate. And what type of sort of concentrate are we suggesting there? Does it matter? Or like, can you go down the cheap route and put some PKE in, or?
You could just, once it's a bit of an energy in it, so once it's a decent energy source of a concentrate, a couple of blends, 3-way blend or something like that would be, you know, a ration that you just have on the farm. Anything really at all would suit.
But I suppose the key thing there with all of that is actually having a handle on what your condition score is, and obviously anything at a 2.5 or less is fairly angular, and whereas
and then over conditioned cows then are non-desirable as well, because they're going to cause more problems. So
there's another question in here. What are the alternatives to straw when restricting diets, when good quality straw is hard to get?
It's tricky. It is tricky this year. There's a lot of straw unsuitable for feeding. We have done a few diets there with barley and hulls, something simple like that. Can be quite expensive, but you're replacing some of the silage in that as well. So something like barley hulls and pulp, or something just that's fibrous and, you know, a bit of barley for energy, or barley maize hulls. Just something like that, some sort of simple ration.
Okay.
That you're substituting out silage and, you know. So you'd maybe go 60 hulls and 40 bar, you know, to bring up the fiber and not have too much energy in there.
Okay.
That's what you'll be doing.
Right, we'll move you on then.
Okay. So the forage we feed is typically low in trace elements. So we have a requirement for a dry cow. So what we're dealing with, we have, when it is grass silage that we're dealing with predominantly in Ireland, we've enough calcium, enough phosphorus. We're low in magnesium, we know that, so we supplement magnesium, but we're also low in trace elements. So that's why we need to supplement the trace elements in the mineral. But we're also high, very high in the antagonists. So your iron, molybdenum, and potassium. So they are the ones we're in excess in. And, you know, that's why we need to have a good strategies in place to prevent some of these diseases around calving time. But it's just a snapshot of what's deficient and what's in excess that we don't want.
And why is iron and molybdenum? Obviously, we know the potassium is a degree of obviously
Yeah.
nutrient source that we put onto ground, but why is iron and molybdenum causing so much trouble there?
I suppose that is weather dependent. On wetter years, you have higher levels of those and compaction as well. So actually, the three of those are relatable to soil. So if you can, they've done a trial actually where you can nearly have some of your potash levels. They did that in the UK there in the late 2010, I think it was. Slit aeration and things like that can significantly reduce some of these elements. Our good soil management. If you have good soil structure, you tend to get less of these. But obviously, in a very wet time, iron and molybdenum and things like that, or if you're in a high molybdenum area, that can just be an unfortunate thing.
All right. Okay. So soil aeration being a benefit to this.
Yeah, and good soil health, I suppose, can definitely help you reduce some of your antagonistic effects.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, friability and obviously earthworm counts and things like that.
Exactly. Good microbiology in the soil, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're all realizing we need to focus a little bit more on that again, though, a bit of a complicated subject, but okay, that's fair enough. Right, we'll move you on again.
With more trace element efficiency, if you get better microbiological activity as well in the soil, you get better uptake of your certain trace elements and things.
Okay. Yeah.
So we can.
So carry on.
So the transition cow period, I suppose, is considered to be 3 weeks before and 3 weeks after calving. So we all know the entire dry period is important, and what you do early on will affect what happens later. But really, the close-up period here, 3 weeks before to 7 after, is probably the most important for the whole lactation season ahead. So that's the area where it sets up the cow for the following lactation. So it's the most critical period really to get right. So it's just summarizing the different section and what's most important. So management factors that can affect close-up cows and fresh cows. So this was a study done in British Columbia there, and moving cows to close-up pens fewer than 10 days before calving can lead to problems. Now, obviously, it's easier said than done that you can avoid this, but it's very hard to avoid it. But to limit it, I suppose, would be what the best advice would be, to just move them freely and easily and no fuss, because it stresses cows out and it does cause problems. Having less than 1 meter feed space for this cohort of cows as well can have an onset of problems caused as well. So 1 meter at least feed space per cow, and then stocking those areas for the close-up group and the fresh group of more than 75% of the stock or 85% of the stocking rate can lead to issues. And for feed intake, a critical thing is to offer fresh feed here and take away feed that's just a small bit stale very quickly, and fresh feed offered all the time. That will really help feed intake, and feed intake is critical in the transition and the close-up and the fresh group. So they're just some issues.
There's probably not enough emphasis put on this topic, is there, Liam? I know the prevalence of, say, milk fever has, I have found my clients, risen, and a lot of the quick fixes has been to put the calcium bolus post calving or during calving in. It's an expensive mean, but it is working for people. But the question is, have they then addressed these issues? Are they just masking a problem? Are they just they have a solution, but they're not actually addressing some of these issues?
Exactly, and that is a key thing. And these are some of the management factors that will definitely help, and will 100%. You will have less problems with all these boxes ticked. Now, I know they're hard boxes to tick. Okay, having every cow into the desired place more than 10 days before calving is it can be difficult. But I suppose the point is that you do it freely with less stress, and the setup is easy, so you can move them nearly with just opening a gate and letting them in somewhere, rather than moving them around the yard a lot. You know what I mean? That would be the key.
Yeah.
And then having the space.
But again, for that cow just carve, that fresh feed and plenty of feed space, plenty of cubicles being very important to her in that first 7 days.
And that's critical. And water cannot be overlooked either. Like if you can't drink the water yourself, there's no way the cow at any stage should be forced to drink it. It should be pristine. And
Cup of
the
tea
feed
type
as well
stuff.
offered in. Exactly.
Okay.
So, but there are some simple management issues that will significantly help, some issues.
Okay, thanks very much.
So this is an effect on hypocalcemia, and hypocalcemia is just simply low blood calciums. And around calving time, a study in New Zealand found that 7% of cows exhibited clinical milk fever, and of those cows, they produce 14% less milk. In the herd, 33% of cows subclinical milk fever, and they produced half that, so 7% less milk. So a huge cost in a 100 cow herd if you have these kind of figures running, and they wouldn't be uncommon, I suppose, So that is a significant cost to the system. Also, then,
but it's not. It's not just milk you lose, is it?
No, it's not. It's worse. It's often worse than that. And as we say, milk fever then is a gateway disease to other metabolic problems like metritis or displaced abomasums, ketosis, stuff like that. So it has a knock-on effect to all other diseases as well around calving time. So I suppose this is something that's practiced in parts of the world, not so much here. Routine use of IV calcium at calving time may cause more problems 1 to 2 days after treatment. What this slide is just basically showing is you are with the small dotted line on the top is the IV calcium. So when you go IV with a standing cow, you really drive up the calcium in the blood, and slowly but surely after 10, 20 hours, 24 hours, it's dropping below where you started. Whereas the oral calcium is a more homeostasis. It never reaches the high point, but it's a more steady supply of calcium, I suppose. So the only real way you'd use IV calcium is if the cow is down. And it's the only way then to get them to respond and get them to get up. But then after 10, 12 hours, maybe even a little longer, 18 hours, you should come in with an oral calcium drench. And then that will guide her through the next 24 hours. So it's just a good slide on the effects of different supplementations of calcium. You see, it even goes lower than the control.
Just to summarize, if you have to intervene with IV calcium, you need to then back it up with an oral form, either in the form of a bolus, often what people opt for,
or a drench.
Or you can, but also what about post-calving mineral? They're not as commonly used, but is that a good way to support cows post-calving?
Definitely, because you're getting in a lot of your macros, your phosphorus, calcium, sodium, and all your trace elements and vitamins as well. So definitely a good way. But that's just a slide on intervention.
What about subcutaneous calcium, just on that? So obviously, putting it under the skin.
Yeah, so it's more similar to the oral line. It wouldn't be giving you as high a spike. So I know it can be tedious to do it, but it can be a good option too.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah.
So another slide on just costs. So milk fever cost per case, €300. And unfortunately, some of these 8% of these cases a lot of cows affected can be culled, and the loss of milk is high, and more cows are longer cycling, slower to go back and calf with clinical milk fever cases. If ketosis costs can vary, but they are quite expensive as well. And then the most expensive ones then are your health cleanings and your DAs, displaced abomasums, because usually they require veterinary treatment and can be difficult enough cases, but they can all be gateway diseases from milk fever. So this is just a quick slide on how all the different, we won't spend long on it, but it's just how all the different diseases, or I suppose metabolic disorders, can be interlinked, and how one can affect the other. And milk fever can be one of the main gateway diseases that can set off a cascade of events to having one or two of the other things. Because milk fever, I suppose, is a lack of muscle function, and metritis, for example, could easily happen because the womb won't close as quick because the muscles don't contract as fast. So there's lots of other diseases that can happen because of low blood calciums and milk fever. So what dietary strategies can we do to prevent some of this? We can do magnesium. We do magnesium supplementation all the time. It's involved in the release of the parathyroid hormone. So the magnesium needs to be optimum levels to release the parathyroid hormone. So the parathyroid hormone is released when blood calcium levels go too low. So it's a hormone at the back of the thyroid gland. And what that does is it gets released. It calls for a signal to send more calcium into the blood, basically. And magnesium is the key trigger for that release. So we need optimum magnesium status to release that hormone. And that hormone controls function. There's 8 kilos of calcium in the bone of a cow, 8 to 9. So when the cow gets low blood calciums around calving time, the parathyroid hormone helps to release more calcium to replenish the blood supply. So there could be 23 grams of calcium in colostrum, for example. There might be only 4 grams of circulating calcium in the cow's blood. So there's a real disbalance. So it's amazing, really, how not every cow goes down with milk fever. Why? Because they're able to rely on this function. And they can release more calcium from the bone. They can release some from the kidney, and they can release it from, they can call to the gut to start releasing more calcium from the feed. So it's really, really interesting what a cow can actually do when the big draw of calcium comes on. The problem we have is if we have really high, like we said before, potash, it messes up the signal and stops the magnesium functioning. So we typically use 30 grams to 35 grams of magnesium, but this, unfortunately, nowadays can be a hit or miss approach, as it may not fully overcome this problem. And then if you go extremely high with magnesium, up to 40, 50, 60 grams, you obviously can lead to some scouring issues and some unpalatable situations and turn cows a bit off feed. So we tend to not go that route. The other strategy is to control the acid-base balance in the cow. So the metabolic pH of the blood. And what we do is we put in anions. So we feed in anions to the cow if we really have, like that silage that we had on the analysis. If we had that, we'd have no real option only to go in with anionic salts and induce a mild metabolic acidosis. So that has a number of benefits. It can increase the calcium hormones. The parathyroid hormone works better. And then you get more calcium absorbed out of the gut and more calcium from the bone. So the cow can replenish its calcium pool and get into a calcium homeostasis a lot quicker. If we have normal magnesium supplementation, but our pH of the blood is too high, we have a significant chance of the whole process not working. So when we put in anionic salts and we have a good magnesium level, we have a great chance then of preventing this hypocalcemia. So that might be a bit difficult to have explained, but I hope we get I've got it across pretty okay.
Yeah.
It can be complex enough,
We do have a question. Is it true that Jersey cows find it difficult to release calcium from the bones?
Yes, they find it more difficult. They struggle with that signal a bit more than other breeds. From the parathyroid hormone. That is true.
I think we have another question as well. No, sorry. Apologies. I must have...
But I suppose, as we said back a good number of years ago, we didn't have to do any of these anionic diets because we had a low potash level in silages, or we were feeding hay and things like that, and we didn't have the same problems, I suppose, associated with some of the silages that we're feeding now. So we could get good absorption of magnesium at 15 grams. We could get no interference with the parathyroid hormone. So by feeding a good balanced mineral at that point, that's all you needed to do, and things worked smoothly. Then we had to go to high levels of magnesium, and then we had to combine that with anionic diets as well as high magnesium.
But I suppose that's also in the combination of, a lot of things have changed on farm in terms of cow numbers, stocking rates in sheds, herd sizes.
And genetic merit, I suppose, Mary, the cows are producing more. So the requirement for calcium is much more at the critical time,
Yeah, we've added on 100 kilos of solids to a cow's productivity. So yeah, it doesn't come from nothing.
Exactly. So there's just a bit more needed in terms of management in these. And look, it's only in that little period of the 21 days before and even the 7 days before and the 7 days after is probably the most critical. Do you know what I mean? So it just takes real attention to detail at that point to just get them across the line, because they're really working hard. Like a cow is really stressed at that stage to try get, like, she's depleted significantly in calcium and she needs to get it back in. So that's the key. So what we do as a going forward plan, some people have decided that got issues with this and just said as an easier life is dedicate silage from a field or paddock receiving little or no slurry before they cut the silage, so that they end up with the old type silage for those type cows that was lower in DICAT. And then you analyze your grass for silage mineral profile, do a few bloods as well, just to get a profile as well, and then balance everything. And then if we're only feeding silage, we really don't need to be too worried about high levels of phosphorus in a pre-calver, because it throws out the calcium phosphorus balance too much. And okay, if you're putting in some straw, you can put in 2-3% phosphorus in a mineral, but I wouldn't be getting too mad about 7, 8, 9% phosphorus in pre-calvers. It's not required. It's causing more problems. Phosphorus very important post-calving. Not so in the silages we feed, not very important pre-calving. Different in high maize diets or maize silage diets, may be a requirement, but not here. So if you have your mineral with 2-3% phos, you've plenty. So that's the minerals, and we just have a small bit to do on, well, we've one little more slide. So these are just, I suppose, summaries. We have a product there that we can, if you run into bother, say you're rigging tomorrow and you're in dire straits with some milk fever and you know you have high DICAT silage, we have a product there that we can introduce straight away that can pull down that. It's an anionic salt that we can pull down the DICAT quickly and get absorption through. So it's a quick fix for people that are in trouble, and it works quite quick. Could work in 12-24 hours. And then obviously older cows struggle more to release calcium from the bone and the gut, so it's good to provide a calcium drench at calving.
Okay. And what about post-calving minerals? Are you encouraging farmers to put those?
Definitely. Yeah, they're something that was fed, I suppose, a number of years, 4 or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, a lot more than now. I suppose people just concentrate feed. I suppose they're feeding that and silage, and they maybe find it hard to get in their post-calver, but it's a very good thing to do, to dust that on top of the silage as well. Even if you have a good feed rate and nuts going in, half rate of a post-calver mineral is a great thing to do, because you're getting in more sodium, phosphorus, calcium, really required in the first 3 weeks after calving.
Okay. It's also, very hard post-calving on cows when they're suddenly gone from 0 meal to an offering of 6 kilos. So there has to be a transitioning into that as well. So I suppose, again, you can only step them up at a certain rate. So it is another way to put minerals in.
And exactly, and that's why you would probably put in a transition diet. That obviously in the last 2-3 weeks, the calf is consuming a lot of space inside in the cow, and you have less ability to intake, so you can increase the energy density of the diet in the last 2-3 weeks. Put them on that transition type diet, and get them over then onto the fresh cow diet easier.
Great stuff. Right, yeah, just conscious of time then, Liam. Also, we have Charles here too. So if we and guys, also conscious of time too. We've obviously worked through quite a few of your questions as we've gone. So if there's any more, just keep them coming in, but we'll work through them as we go. But we probably won't have a huge amount of time at the end for questioning. So
we just have 2-3 slides on just one of our flagship products in the company. I suppose not alone in the calf section, in the whole company, I suppose this is one of our flagship products, and it's really, really working well on farm for supporting growth and higher performance in calves, is Milkshake. Probably a lot of you will be familiar with the product. And I suppose it works really, really well in milk and milk replacer. It really has come about, I suppose, where people have said, you know, I feed 5 litres to a calf. When I go feed 6, I can start seeing softer feces and bits of undigested milk coming through. And that can be a factor of a calf just not physically able to clot that milk fast enough. So when the milk goes into the abomasum, they need to be able to clot that milk. So Milkshake aids in that support. It clots the milk fast, so you get less milk unfermented then moving down into the small intestine. And if unfermented milk goes down there, it causes irritation in the gut and can lead to pathogenic bacteria and stuff, and pathogenic organisms coming in, like rotavirus, like cryptosporidium, and causes significant health problems for calves and scour and problems like that. So it's a really good product. It's the one product that I suppose we find that shows people come up to us and say, we get great results from that, and we wouldn't rear calves without it, basically. So where you feed it, where higher growth rates are required, so everyone's looking for higher growth rates, you get those in young, very young calves by feeding more milk, and you really benefit from average daily gain before weaning from milk. For every gram of average daily gain, you benefit, you get an extra kick in litres for that first lactation of that heifer when she goes into the herd. So gain from milk pre-weaning is key for formulation of the mammary gland and setting up that cow for life, basically. So where you have diseases or diarrheas as well, it's a great product to fight those, and it's a multifactorial product, and it fights the battle from a lot of different angles, I suppose, and where you have health problems. So Milkshake can feed more milk, improve the nutrient digestibility of that milk, so you have more nutrients available for energy, protein, and fat, and it supports the health of the calf, so better immune function of that calf. And we're adding nutrients like vitamins, which are antioxidants that fight infection and are deficient in cow's milk. And so we definitely have calves that have a higher antioxidant capacity, and they can definitely perform better when you vaccinate them as well, because their immune system is better. And when you go in with a vaccine, you need a functioning immune system for it to work. So that's really the little brief on Milkshake and how it benefits the calf. But I'll leave it at that then. If there's any questions on either thing.
yeah, no, I think we had a great presentation there, Liam, and yeah, if anybody has any questions, please put it into the chat function or raise a hand. But I suppose the key thing is that while obviously you managed to get a few plugs in there for the product, the key thing is, I think, is obviously that silage analysis. So you've got a little bit of a profile of what feed you're actually dealing with. So making sure you're doing that now, but making sure that it's representative of the feed you're going to be feeding in another 4 weeks' time. Yeah, and obviously that management of that pre-calving cow and her diet during that transition period. So taking the pressure off when they're coming under to that highest pressure of stress and post calving. So yeah, sometimes, you know, if you're finding you're putting in a lot of calcium boluses in post calving or at the point of calving, I suppose to ask the questions, do I need to change some of my management? Now, yeah, so there was a question there. If blood iodine was low, how would you supplement it?
So that's a very good question. Yeah, if blood iodine was low, that can be a trace element. Typically will take a number of weeks to correct itself. So if you're showing low, as we said at the start of the presentation, we may be losing some iodine. So if we're feeding a powder, it could be volatilizing. So typically we find guys don't have iodine problems feeding Iodex. But the key with a trace element, I suppose, is not to overfeed it. Because if you overfeed one trace element, it can have a knock-on effect on other things. So a balance is key. But really, for a trace element, you need to be feeding it for 6 weeks to correct the deficiency. And that's the reason why we try to get people to feed a pre-calver for 6 to 8 weeks. Not just 4 to 6, 6 to 8, because you really need continuous feeding to correct the trace element deficiency. And when we did a study on the Iodex before, we saw maybe something in the range of sometimes 40% iodine being lost on certain types of silage. And it can be sporadic. Some silages wouldn't lose as much, maybe 10, 15%. Others could lose 40, 50%.
Okay.
So
thank you very much, Liam. I'm going to press on, just conscious of time, but I appreciate your time and your presentation today. We've covered quite a lot. And I'm now going to hand over to my colleague here, Michelle McGrath, who's going to introduce Charles Chavasse, and we'll move on now to focus on calf housing and calf health. So thank you very much again, Liam. Handing over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Liam. It was very informative. You did well in explaining that DCAD thing, because I could never get that when I was in college, and I was there for a long time. So well done, and I learned a lot on a lot of refreshers, definitely. Thanks a million. We'll hand over to Charles, I suppose, just to introduce Charles to any of you who don't know him. He qualified as a vet at over 25. Well, he qualified in 1985 and was in practice for 25 years, including having his own practice in Dungarvan. Since 2010, he's worked with Zoetis, which was previously known as Pfizer, and deals a lot with all people in the agri sector, from farmers to industry people, supporting them technically, and helps us in Animal Health Ireland as well. He's a fountain of knowledge, and his main interests include housing, health planning, and mastitis. And I was very interested to hear there, Liam, when you mentioned about how the importance of having enough cubicles. We're always trying to encourage farmers to have at least 1.1 cubicles per cows from a mastitis point of view. So that can be another thing that we can mention about transition diets and metabolic stress. So thanks for that. And I'll hand over to Charles. Can we see you, Charles?
Michelle, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Perfect.
And I'm assuming you can all see the first slide as well. Is that right?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Brilliant.
I think for this one, Charles, I think you're happy to present and then take questions might be easier. Or is that fair enough to say?
Yeah, I think if you want to add questions as I'm talking, if you think of something that you want a clarification on, please stick it in the chat function, and we'll pick them up at the end, because I think that might be more efficient on the time usage. Yeah. But look, thank you very much for inviting me along this evening. And I was asked to talk about the calf shed. And I've titled this, calf shed lastminute.com, because the reality is, I think probably most people who are listening to this are going to start calving within about 3 weeks' time. So, there isn't a lot of time to make huge changes to a shed, but there are things that we can do around the management of that shed, which can really reduce the incidence of pneumonia in particular, but also of calf scars as well. So, what I really want to talk about is healthy calves and pneumonia control, but the healthy calves is a really important thing, because if we've got healthy calves, and in fairness, Liam touched on this, what happens to these calves that are inside your cows at the moment? What happens to them in the next 2 to 3 months is going to have a huge impact on whether that heifer delivers a decent yield in her first lactation. But much more importantly than that, it also has an impact on whether she's going to go in calf a second time. So calves that grow faster in the first 6 weeks, 42 days of life, are more likely to go in calf a second time. And that's absolutely crucial, because a heifer that goes in calf and calves down once and doesn't go in calf as a first calver isn't actually profitable, and it's not sustainable either. So you can make a huge difference in how these calves are managed now. Is going to have a huge impact on the survival of those calves, obviously, but also of your herd. And having heifers that have grown well as young calves, they're going to actually be heifers that are going to calve down early, and they're more likely to stay in the herd in the long term, which is absolutely crucial. But looking at how we achieve this, I often talk about this three-legged stool. And the thing about a three-legged stool is that you can stand on a three-legged stool as long as all three legs are sound. If one of the legs is dodgy, you're going to fall off the stool. And the same is true about calf health. And the three legs of the stool in calf health are calf well-being. And in that, I'm talking about nutrition and the management of the calf. And Liam's touched on some of that, but we'll talk a tiny bit more about that again. The environment, in other words, the calf shed design, but really critically, how we manage that calf shed. And then the pathogen load. And by that, I mean the bugs. We want to reduce the exposure of bugs, so whether it be viruses, coccidia, rotavirus, etc. But we want to reduce the exposure and the challenge, but we also need to be looking at increasing immunity as well. So this is where vaccination can play a part. And, the whole game really on calf rearing is about prevention. Treating calves is, to be honest, a mug's game. And once you're treating calves, you've effectively failed, and you're now on the back foot. And I found as a practitioner, frequently I get through January, I get through February, and everyone's happy. But unfortunately, when there's a really good system in place, is when we get into March, and particularly when we get to St. Patrick's Day. If you've still got healthy calves at that stage, you've done a fantastic job. But that's the difficult bit. Getting through the first 2 or 3 weeks, to be quite honest, is relatively straightforward. It's when the numbers really start to build up that we need to be on our game. And that's all about having a good plan in place to start off with. But if we can just go through the three legs of the stool, and the first one being calf well-being, and colostrum 1, 2, 3. And this message has been around with Animal Health Ireland for many, many years now, and it's absolutely critical. And I know you've all heard it before. But if I can, I've found that when I'm talking to farmers now, they know this. Everyone knows this one. It's the first milk. We need to feed it within 2 hours, and we need at least 3 litres. Now, in fairness, if you've got bigger calves, it's actually 8.5% of body weight. So that's 3 litres for a 35-kilo calf. But if you've got bigger cows, you want to be feeding more than 3 litres in that first feed. But if I could just catch on one place that I notice where sometimes there are issues with colostrum, and that's around the quality and its first milk. Because if you had a cow that calved this evening at 8 o'clock, for the sake of argument, and let's just say we had another freshly calved cow that had been milked in the evening milking at 6 o'clock, and you had milk colostrum left around, you might go and feed that colostrum to that calf. And the question I then ask farmers is, so okay, the cow that calved at 8 o'clock, she then gets milk tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, and that's the first milk. But that's not colostrum. And that's a very common mistake people make. It's not colostrum because it's over 8 hours from when she calved to when she actually, that you actually harvested the colostrum. The colostrum has to be harvested within 8 hours. And some people would say even earlier, and in high yielding cows, it probably wants to be within 6 hours. But that's one key point, is to watch that colostrum quality. On the nutrition, I'm not going to dive in too deep into this one, but with used calf milk replacer, but read the label, and it's really critical that it's mixed at the correct concentration and the correct temperature. And for the temperature, you can't judge that by putting your hand into the water. You can't assume that what comes out of the tap every morning is going to be the same temperature either. You really do need to be using a thermometer. And for concentration, you really want to be talking about weighing rather than using volume, because we all know that the bag at the bottom of the pallet is more compressed, less volume, so more dense. So using volume isn't actually that good. It really needs to be weighed. The other thing, if you're using an automatic feeder, don't assume that it's doing the job perfectly, because unfortunately we have situations where that isn't the case. So you need to calibrate them, and you need to check that they are delivering what they should be delivering as well. And then it's critical, and Liam mentioned this, clean fresh water, it's critical for calves as well, okay? And what gets the rumen going is drinking clean fresh water and eating a palatable creep feed. Personally, I like the muesli feeds more than the pencils or the cubes. But the fresh water is absolutely critical, and it needs to be clean fresh water, because milk is not water, and they need fresh water from day one. And the creep feed, start offering small quantities of it from 2 or 3 days of age, and anything that's left over at the end of the day, move it to the older calves and keep offering the younger calves fresh creep. It wants to be offered to them once or twice a day. And personally, I'm a straw person rather than a hay person. But again, this year is going to be challenging because I know there's a shortage of straw. But I think the best straw we should probably be keeping for calves, because these heifer calves are the future of your herd. We really need to give them the best if we can. And yes, on a management point of view, disbudding is a painful procedure. So, using anesthesia, local anesthesia and analgesia makes a huge difference, okay? And you just don't want these calves to have a check at all in that first 6-week period, when frequently they may be being disbudded. So we need to be thinking about the welfare of the calves there as well. Now, if we look at the environment, the calf shed, there's only 5 things you have to get right in a calf shed. But it's not always that easy. So the thing is, the 5 things you need to get right is it needs to be well ventilated, which means we need plenty of fresh air, but the air speed, it mustn't be too fast. We've got to have no drafts. So those 2 things are pushing against each other in one sense. Temperature, a calf shed should be warm. It's critical that it's dry. We want to control moisture. We need a dry bed, we need dry floors, and it needs to be clean and cleanable. Now, I can list those 5 things, and you look at that and you think, oh, that's very easy in one sense, but what's the easiest way of cleaning a shed? It could be a high volume pressure hose squirting down that concrete to keep it absolutely spotlessly clean. But if you do that, you just increase the amount of moisture. And by doing that, you've actually reduced the temperature in the shed. So a lot of these things are pulling in opposite directions. So whereas we need to be aware of these 5 points, we've got to work quite hard to get them right. And I'm just going to show you a couple of slides here. And this is a very typical shed that you'd often see in Ireland. It's 14 foot at the eaves there. You've got an 8-foot wall. They always seem to build 8-foot walls. It's got 6 foot of vented sheeting. That's the tin that's perforated. It's got a good gap on the top of the roof. You can see there's a good gap there. And the thing is, this is the shed. And the reason I'm standing here is because the shed isn't working. We've got a problem with calf pneumonia. Now, interestingly enough, there isn't quite enough air coming into this shed. But the real issue actually was the fact that the shed does slope from, we're standing at the bottom of the hill. It does run down here. There is actually a drain running from where the pointer working. Here you go. Can you see that? There is actually a drain running from the feeder here down here. But unfortunately, it's completely blocked up with straw and hay that's been pushed forward. So this is what you see when you get here. It's just a quagmire around here. So there's a huge amount of moisture building up. I have a lot of time for automatic calf feeders. Well managed, they're brilliant. Poorly managed, they're an absolute disaster. And this is the case where it's a perfectly good machine. I'd argue it's been sited in the wrong place. And it's just a lack of drainage is the #1 issue here. And that's actually, that lack of drainage isn't because there wasn't a drain there. It's because someone didn't keep it clean. That's something we can sort out on a day-to-day basis. So these are the sort of things we need to be aware of when we're looking at calves and going into the calf shed every day. Well ventilated means that the air within the building changes with clean air from outside. So I'm not talking about a grand airy shed, because you can have these very tall sheds, okay, but the air isn't actually changing. We need the air to in fact change. Calf sheds don't need to be high. They are probably better when they're designed, when they're actually only about 12 feet at the 11, 12 feet at the eaves. And the height you want at the eaves is just so you can get the tractor in and out. The calves themselves would actually live with it slightly lower still. It's also critical that the space isn't shared with older animals, because the air is not clean then. Because if it's being shared with older animals, potentially there are pathogens in those as well. So traditionally, we often had calf sheds built up beside the parlour, which made a lot of sense because at that stage we're feeding whole milk. But they then shared the airspace with these cows. And they often share the airspace with obviously freshly calved cows, which are under pressure and are more likely to be shedding viruses as well. So it's really important that the calf shed is purely for calves. And if you go back long enough, and I remember when I first started, frequently we had a calving pen inside the calf house. It was really handy because you could then move the calf into the calving, you didn't have to move the calf far. But actually it's a disaster because you've now got cows that are freshly calved in the same space as calves, which is just not a runner. It's not clean air. But this fresh air, it's not just a brush. It's not just pushing the viruses and the bugs out. Actually, fresh air is a biocide. It, in fact, kills off viruses. There have been various studies that have been done on this, but a bug that can survive, say, for 15 minutes in the fresh air outside can last for 12, 24 hours inside. So you see the actual air itself coming into the building is deactivating viruses. But not only that, the air will also remove noxious gases like ammonia. And it also is really important about removing moisture. And we're going to talk about moisture later on. But moisture isn't just, obviously calves generate a lot of moisture. Remember, this calf is drinking 6 liters of milk plus some water. All of that liquid has got to go somewhere. So it doesn't take long. You can see that these calves are both breathing out moisture, and they're also obviously urinating a lot of moisture as well onto the bedding too. So we've got to work out how to manage all of this, this liquid. In Ireland, fortunately, 90% of the time the wind blows. Now, it does depend on where you site your shed. It depends whether you're in a glen, whether you're in an exposed site, et cetera, et cetera. So these have impacts on it. But whatever system you have, we can do calculations and we know how much air is needed. So for instance, we know that for a calf, we need an exit in the top of the roof. And it needs the area of that needs to be 0.04 meters squared per calf. For adults, it's obviously considerably more. But it means that, for instance, if you've got 100 calves, you need a hole in the roof effectively that's 4 meters squared. And we can work that out by measuring the length of the building and the width of the gap here. But be careful. This diagram isn't actually true for calves because calves do not generate heat, okay? So this is what's true for a weanling or a ruminant, but basically calves are only about 200 watts. They do not produce hot air that rises. So in fact, we are dependent on air hitting the side of the building. Some of it will come through the vented material we've got on the side of the building, and some of it will run up the roof here. Now, again, be careful because sometimes on these cowls, it runs up the roof here and it causes a downdraft. So we do better to have a situation like we have here, where we've got upstands on either side, okay? And when the wind runs up the side here, in fact, you can see it in this diagram here, the wind is running up the side, it's hitting this guide plate and it's going over the top, okay? And by going over the top there, it's creating negative pressure and it's drawing air out from inside here. Okay, so this, if you didn't have that guide plate there, you'd get this downdraft. So it's really critical that we look at how those are done. You can't sort that now, or it's very difficult to sort that now. We're 3 weeks away. I don't think it's a good idea to be running around on roofs in the next 3 weeks. So you're going to have to live with the situation you have, but it's something worth considering to change before next year. A lot of the time people talk about Yorkshire boarding, and it's a wonderful thing when it's put up properly. Again, you can't do that in the next 3 weeks. If you were thinking of putting up Yorkshire boarding, it should have been done by now. This is the job should never be rushed. But if I can just point out, space boarding is a single row of boards and is not really appropriate for calf sheds. If we're going to put boarding on the side of a shed, it should be Yorkshire boarding. And typically that would be a 6-inch board with a 1.5-inch gap between each board. But also it's 1.5 inches between the 2 rows. And this diagram isn't quite correct because in fact, if Yorkshire boarding is put up correctly, you cannot see through it, whatever angle you look at it. The air can get through, but you can't actually see through it. If you can see through it, it means the air could potentially blow straight through and create a draft. And this is an example of where Yorkshire boarding has been put up correctly, and you can't actually see through it at any stage, but the air can get through it. But it's too late. Forget it. Yorkshire boarding, if you were going to think of putting that up, it should have been done way before now. What can be fitted in a day is fans. Positive pressure ventilation systems can be fitted very quickly. So if you've got a shed that you know is lacking in ventilation and we're now 3 weeks out, you could get this sorted. And we're fortunate because there's a company up in Northern Ireland who fits these. It's really critical that the holes are the right size and cut in the right place. And this is something that the engineer will work out. And that depends on the height of the fan and the width of the building. But it's important that the air doesn't blow straight down onto the calves, but effectively bounces off the wall. Because if it blew straight down onto the calves, effectively the calves would be in a draft. It's also critical that there's an air outlet. You're blowing obviously the air in, so that takes care of the fact that there are no inlets on the side. But it's also critical that there's a way of the air getting out of the shed as well. So you do need to have outlets. And interesting enough, that's what these are here. You can see these big holes in the roof here because there's a loft in this one. They had outlets going straight up in this particular building. But that can be fitted quite easily in a day. Now, you'd need time for them to make the tube and bring it down to you and all the rest of it. But I mean, the thing is, the actual fitting can be done relatively quickly. There's a few problems with this picture.
A question there, Charles.
Go on.
Sorry. Just a question. What is the company that supplies those? Just as we're talking about, in case we don't get back to it.
Magdeck.
The
Magdeck. Okay, Google Magdeck. That's Magdeck. If you Google them, you'll find it there. And the great thing about them, they are an Irish company. They're based up in, I think it's Lisbon, but they are at least on the island of Ireland. Just looking at this picture, though, there's a couple of problems here. One is the fact that that's actually space boarding. That's not Yorkshire boarding, which is not ideal. But the real thing I'm trying to point out here is having older calves in the same airspace as younger calves. Now, this wouldn't be typical of a lot of the farms we have in Munster, but you could have this certainly up the country. These are obviously autumn-born calves with spring-born calves. That's never a good mix. You want these calves well out of here before these calves move into the shed. And that's what I'm talking about, shared airspace, which is not a good idea. So these calves are not getting fresh air. They're having to share it. So that's about ventilation. Drafts. We need to prevent drafts. It's critical that there's no air getting into a shed at calf height. Okay. The problem about drafts is, yes, they make the calf cold, but the really critical thing is they drop the calf's immune system. So even if most of the calves are able to get out of the draft, if you've got 1 or 2 calves who are being hit by a draft, their immune system drops. They then succumb to whatever pathogens are in the environment. They then multiply those up and they then infect the rest of the shed. So it's really critical that we control drafts. And that's a draft. You know, underneath that door there is a draft. It's about 2 inches. And when the air hits the outside of that door, it doesn't just give up, it accelerates underneath here and it will come through that little gap here. And we need to work out ways of stopping those drafts. So rubber flaps, tech screwed on the bottom here, and a rubber flap here would work very well. This was a farm I went to, and this man thought he had a very good system before, and this is before he put on the rubber flaps. But he spent one evening sorting out the milk feeder that was behind this door, and it was absolutely bitter because of the air that was blowing in before he put the rubber flap on here and underneath it. And having experienced that draft, he realized every time a calf went to his milk feeder, they were basically having to, they were basically being hit by a draft. So he went overboard and absolutely blocked it all off here, because basically that's not where the air should be getting into the shed. So that needs to be killed. It needs to be stopped. And that's what draft protection is all about. Temperature. Ideally, the temperature in a calf shed should be somewhere between 15 and 20 degrees. And you know, I say, what is the temperature of a calf house today? I wasn't actually out in the car today, but I think the temperature was probably about 7 degrees. I mean, it's been quite mild recently. That's what the temperature in the calf shed will be. And when you walk in, you know, I often drive onto farms and I just look at the thermometer as I'm driving on in the car, because that's the temperature that the calf shed is going to be. Calves don't generate heat. You think it's warmer when you walk into the calf shed. That's purely because you've walked out of the wind chill side of it. So the thing is, if the temperature of the car says it's 4 degrees, you know what? You're going to find the temperature in the shed is 4 degrees. And generally in Ireland, When we get into February and March, that's what we're talking about, 4 or 5 degrees. So in other words, calves are actually, calf sheds aren't as warm as they should be in Ireland. And investing in calf jackets is certainly something worth considering. A lot of people have done this now. And some people have done it when they've had sick calves, and they've found that even the sick calf has a chance of catching up with the other ones. But if you do use calf jackets, you need to make sure that the calf jacket itself is breathable. You want to have clips. You don't want to have Velcro. Velcro never works for the second calf. They need to be washable, and you need to keep them clean. So every time you use one on a calf, when you move it onto the next calf, it's critical that you wash it, dry it before it moves on to the next calf. It needs to be put onto a dry calf. You've got to wait until the calf is dry. You need to adjust the straps because the calf is going to grow underneath it. And you probably only need them for 3 weeks to a month. You don't need them for longer than that. So, you'd often get 2 calves out of a jacket. And people have found that basically when you use these jackets, the calves grow faster and stay healthier. And that, remember, when I started this talk, I was telling you the importance of calves growing fast in these first 6 weeks. And here we can go. And that's not about feeding extra powder. It's basically about keeping them warmer. I think in time, and I think I'd be promoting these from a welfare and a health point of view. I think one day people are going to be talking to you about it from an economic point of view. It'll actually save you on milk powder. You'll be able to feed less milk powder and still get the same performance by using calf jackets. Moisture is evil in a calf shed, basically. Nothing survives in a desert, and that's because deserts are dry places. They're very healthy places to be. Bugs survive incredibly well in a moist environment. And if I told you that viruses don't have wings, and you know that if you've got a shed that's, say, 4 bays long and you get calf pneumonia at one end of that shed, in 2 days you're going to have calf pneumonia at the other end of the shed. So how did the virus move down the shed? And basically the way it moved down the shed was on water droplets. Water droplets effectively are buses for bugs. So lots of water droplets help the transmission of bugs, okay? It also reduces the temperature of a building. I mean, we know that if we walk into a building that's got wet floors and wet walls, it feels colder, and that's due to latent heat vaporization. And you've already seen this picture. So we've got moisture here, which means we've got bugs surviving, okay, which is a bad thing, okay. We've got here a leaking water trough, which would be at the back of the is actually on the back of the pen, which again is not a good place because that's just leaking into things. So this is something we can fix now. Go and check all your water troughs. Make sure there aren't any leaks because we need to stop that happening. Here we've got someone who's got really enthusiastic about emptying all the water buckets and washing this down. And doesn't it look lovely and clean, which is great. Except every time you throw that bucket on the water, you're stirring up pathogens here, bugs, that will then get into the air and can move around the shed. So whereas that looks really good and someone thinks they've done a wonderful job, I'm afraid I'm giving out to you saying you've just spread all the bugs around the place and you've also made the building colder as well. So when we're throwing water away in a calf shed, we should be pouring it straight down the drain, not splashing it around the place. And these calf feeders, the drainage is critical, and where they're sited is absolutely is important. And here we've got plenty of drains underneath here. And I think, oh no, this is one which has gone horribly wrong. Here's an urban feeder. There's nothing wrong with them. They're great feeders, but it's sited in the wrong place. I'm actually walking uphill to this one. So this drain here is completely blocked, and it's just a quagmire here. And in fact, to sort this problem, we actually ended up by blowing a hole in the wall here and just letting it all drain out there. It was just the easiest way of solving it. But when that sort of thing is going on, there is absolutely no way calves are going to stay healthy in that situation. And compare that to this one. And here we've got lots of dry concrete. He's even gone to great lengths to make sure that there isn't a room for wet concrete by bringing the straw as close here. There's a drain running straight down the middle of the shed here, underneath the barrier, so the bull calves are actually peeing straight into the channel effectively. But this is kept very, very dry. The way he keeps that clean is a scraper. He doesn't wash it; it's a scraper. And because it's smooth concrete, it's relatively easy for them to keep it. So if it's been designed properly in the first place, and we've got smooth concrete there, it's easy to do. And there's also a decent slope from the back of the shed to the front of the shed too. So keeping things dry is a good thing. And hygiene, sheds need to be clean and cleanable. Now, I'm hoping all your sheds, those of you who are about to start calving, will clean sometime back in the summer, because having had them, when the shed is completely empty, that's the time to power wash it, let it dry, and that drying process is also really important, but it should have been done months ago. You can't basically do it when you've got calves in there. If you start power hosing your shed when there are calves in there, you're just going to spread bugs around the place. You've got all those water droplets, you're reducing the temperature. It's just not going to help the calves that are already there. So the design has to be such that we don't go in with loads of water during the period when the calves are being reared. And I know this is very challenging for those of you who are autumn and spring calving, is how you have the break. But it's really worth planning a decent break so that you could have washed them out there, say during December or whenever, before you actually need to use them again. Marking out frequency depends on stocking rate, drainage, and ventilation. So ideally, the bedded area that the calves have got, they should get 2 meters squared per calf. Now, I'm not talking about the pen area. I'm talking about the area that's got straw that's bedded. So you can work out basically how many calves should fit into that area. If you start pushing it so that you've got more calves in there, so suddenly the area starts getting down to 1.6 or 1.7 meters squared per calf, you're going to have to muck out more frequently. If you've got poor ventilation, remember ventilation takes moisture away as well, you're going to have to muck out more frequently. If you've got poor drainage and potholes in the actual bottom of the thing, you're going to have to muck out more frequently. So, if in a well-designed shed, you don't have to muck out as frequently. But what you should be doing is going in there and kneeling where the calves are lying down, and also walk into the shed straight away, walk to the back of the shed where the calves are lying, kneel down and put your nose 6 inches off the ground. The trouble about ammonia, which you may smell at that point, is that if you stand in the shed for 5 or 10 minutes talking about it, your nose becomes accustomed to the ammonia and you won't pick it up. Whereas if you walk straight in and have a sniff, you'll pick it up. But if you're smelling that ammonia smell, again, it means you need to muck out. And remember, when you go mucking out, you're actually obviously removing bugs and everything, but you're removing a whole load of moisture as well, which helps keep the place drier as well. This obviously is not clean, and it's fixed to the wall, to the gate there, and it hasn't been cleaned in a long time. Strangely enough, when I show this to vets, they often think, well, we often see that. Whereas a lot of farmers and a lot of you are going to be looking at this being absolutely appalled that that exists. Vets go into places where there are sick calves. That's why we get a chance to see this, whereas many of you will never have seen a calf fetal like that. But obviously, that is a recipe for breeding bugs and not a good idea. But in cleaning that out, if you're doing the washing and the cleaning within the calf shed, which is often the situation, when you wash that out, you carefully pour the water down the drain. You don't splash it on the floor, because if you splash it on the floor, you spread bugs around and you make the place colder as well. Right, so I've done 2 legs of the stool, okay? So we've talked about calf well-being, early nutrition, colostrum, okay? We've talked about the shed, the 5 points on the shed, okay? Now we just talk a tiny bit about the pathogen load, i.e. the bugs, okay? And what we want to do is reduce exposure, so the less the calves are exposed to bugs, the better. So the sooner the calves can move away from the cow to a safe environment, the better. A calf shed is a safe environment. A calving pen isn't. Calving pens often have other cows. They have potentially cows staggering around with milk fever. Hopefully not, but it can happen. There's basically dung, etc., being sprayed around the place. There's, you've got animals potentially coughing up IBR and other viruses. So, the sooner they can move into the calf house, the better. Again, no shared air spaces, so we don't want the calves to be shared with adult animals. We need clean utensils, and for instance, you need at least 2 stomach tubes on a farm. One kept spotlessly clean for treating, or rather for feeding colostrum. and then another one used for electrolytes. The one that's used for electrolytes should never go into anywhere near a newborn calf. And you cannot wash or disinfect as well as just by making sure it never actually gets used for that purpose. But we also need, so the pathogen load, we can reduce the exposure, but we also want to talk about increasing immunity. And one way of doing that, and many of you may have been doing that in the last week or so, is vaccinating cows. For rotavirus and coronavirus in particular. And what that does, it increases the antibodies within the milk, in the colostrum, which is really good. And that means you've got a better quality colostrum, but it's then critical that you actually feed enough of the colostrum in the right, quickly enough, etc. So this is where your colostrum 1, 2, 3 comes in. The other thing is that we can also look at vaccinating the calves, and in particular, we're talking about respiratory disease here. And trying to prevent pneumonia. And it's not just about vaccinating the heifers. We should be vaccinating all the calves that are in that airspace. So if you have got bull calves that are staying on the farm for 3-4 weeks, you're vaccinating them for the benefit of the heifers. And we kind of all know this because we lived through a pandemic. Now, that taught us a lot of things. It taught us that there isn't one single thing that's going to solve your respiratory problems. That yes, you've got to stop shaking hands, you've got to wear masks and all the rest of it, you've got to avoid crowded spaces and vaccination. But one thing on its own isn't going to do it. And again, vaccination on its own is not going to solve all your problems. But if we decided to only vaccinate half the population, it wouldn't have worked for those of us who are vaccinated versus those that aren't. So it's really important that the whole population are vaccinated. There is a vaccine. This is the original Risperdal RSPI3 intranasal. It says exactly what it is on the tin, effectively, in the sense that it's an intranasal vaccine against RSV and PI3, which are two of the most common causes of viral pneumonia in young calves. It's a single dose. It's licensed from 9 days of age. And there are people who are using vaccines at younger ages, and you can do that. What you need to remember is that a newborn calf's immune system isn't as robust as a calf that's a week, 2 weeks of age. So there's a sort of balance between vaccinating very early, but not getting quite such a good immune response, versus waiting a bit and getting a better immune response. The immunity onset is very quick, 5 days, and you'll get about 12 weeks duration of immunity. So that'll get the calves outside again. Don't disbud the calves at the same time as vaccinating them. People think that's a really good way of marking the calves, but disbudding is stressful. So if you go doing that, okay, unfortunately, the vaccine isn't going to work properly. So you really want to wait 2 weeks after being vaccinated before you go anywhere near disbudding. When you use the vaccine, it basically atomizes, and this aerosol goes about 18 inches from the end of the end of the nozzle here. We've now got these nasal guards, which make it much easier to use the vaccine, because effectively what you do is you rest the nasal guard against the calf's nostril, and you then deliver the 2 ml dose up the single nostril. And it's these young small calves, it's easy enough to catch them and do that. What I would say is, whatever vaccination program you're going down, make it work for your system. So for some people, that means that we decide to go and do it every Saturday because we've got the kids around who can give us a hand holding the calves. And you just go and vaccinate all the calves that are over 9 days of age, and you write down the last calf you vaccinated, and then next week on Saturday you go and do it that way as well. For some farms, that works well. For other farms, they're moving the calves up to another shed, so you do them as you move them. So get a system that works for you. The worst thing that people do is they go and buy the vaccine now, stick it in the fridge, and they don't do anything about it until you've got a problem. In other words, you're now into March and you've got a problem. You need to vaccinate from an early age, and the reason you vaccinate, the young calf, the firstborn calves need to get vaccinated early before they start getting sick. Otherwise, you've got a problem because they keep hitting the new calves going in there. So it's really important to have a system and don't leave the stuff in the fridge, basically, is to actually use it as you go along in February and not wait until there's a problem. So perfect shed, perfect system, no. I haven't found it yet. Looking forward to finding it. But what this means is we need a holistic approach. We need to consider everything. So we've talked about all these points. So we've talked about colostrum feeding, disbudding, etc., using analgesia. We've talked about the environment, keeping calves away from older animals and vaccination. So you can't just pick, this isn't an a la carte menu where you choose 1 or 2 points on this. You need to look at all of these points on your farm and work at all of those points, okay? What I have done, though, is just looked at, 3 weeks to go. That's the reality. In 3 weeks' time, many of you are going to be starting on this one. So what can you actually do? And it's really important that you make a good start. So, we've talked about the colostrum. That's an easy one. That's an absolute given, okay? If when we get to the disbudding and castration, look at giving anesthetics and analgesia. This has really improved. In my career, we didn't used to use nearly enough anesthetic and analgesia when I first started out. It's something that young vets are doing, are much more conscious of now, and we need to all be conscious of this. This is for both the welfare of the calf. It's also because actually it makes for a more profitable system as well. So it's money well spent. From the environment, if it's a problem, you could fit a fan. It's too late to be talking about Yorkshire boarding, because one thing about Yorkshire boarding is it takes time to put it up properly. If someone says he can knock it up for you in the next week, he's going to rush it. It's going to be done badly, and there are going to be holes in it, and it's just not going to work properly. But you could fit a fan. Drafts, we can sort them now. Get out there tomorrow, go around, and basically make sure that there's no air getting in below 4 feet. So no air needs to get into a calf shed below 4 feet from the ground, okay? And basically a few tech screws and rubber flaps, and you can sort out the sliding doors. Actually, one thing, big sliding doors are a nightmare, because every time you open them, you let a draft of wind in as well. It's worth having a man-sized door, a small door that you can walk in and out of, rather than having to slide the whole door open when you're going in. So it's worth considering fitting one of those. That could be done in the next 3 weeks if you've got a handyman around. Temperature, calf jackets is worth considering. And normally I say plenty of straw, which in some farms is going to be challenged this time, but calves should have enough straw to nest in. So that means when they're lying down, their legs are effectively covered. Fix any leaks and be careful where you throw water. Just keep that moisture down as much as you possibly can. Hygiene, yeah, things have got to be clean. And then from the bugs, keep the calves away from older animals, so move as soon as possible. Come up with a system that works for your farm, whether it's you do them once a week or whether you do them when you're moving from one shed to another, but just have a system so you know what's being vaccinated. But you need to get the vaccine into these calves at a young age. Don't be waiting until you've got 100 calves on the ground and we're beginning to get a little bit of a disease going on there. It's better to vaccinate before you have any problems at all in any of the calves. And wait at least 2 weeks before you go disbudding. So make sure that the immunity is in place before you step off and go vaccinating. Go disbudding. And that's me, but I know there's some questions coming in here. So I'll start looking at the chat function, shall I, Michelle? Yeah.
Thanks, Charles. Would you mind stopping sharing there so I can put up the list of farm events that we have coming up? One of the questions I had, and then a similar one came in, was the question was about drying an area where the washing area for washing the buckets is in the calf house, and they dried the area with a gas heater. What are your thoughts on that? Or what are your thoughts? Are there any kind of like drying agents that can dry a calf house in general if there is a lot of moisture that you can fix the drain before the next few weeks?
Just be careful, but depending on the heater, there's a lot of straw around here. I don't want the place going up in flames now. So I mean, I'd be slightly careful on that's quite an expensive way of getting rid of moisture, to be quite honest. So this fixing the drain would make more sense to me from an economic point of view. The other thing, so I'd even go so far as to say wash the buckets outside. I know that's not much fun for the person who's doing the feeding, but the thing is that chasing calves around with antibiotics and trying to treat calves with pneumonia isn't much fun either. So the thing is if we can prevent disease, we save time in the long term. And that's why, we go to all these lengths around the colostrum and everything too. So that's probably why I say that. I tell you what, there's a question that's come up here, which actually has come straight to me, which I'd quite like to address, if you don't mind, which was, the question is, what about AMR, antimicrobial resistance? Does TASA recommend not vaccinating all calves and to leave a few to reduce resistance? No. Let's be quite clear about this. Vaccination is not about antimicrobial resistance. Okay, so we should vaccinate the whole population. Vaccinating the whole population isn't going to build up resistance, okay? Resistance is about when you're using an antibiotic, which is something that kills bugs, okay, rather than stimulating the immune system. So vaccination, so we're kind of getting mixed messages in there.
They're probably thinking of parasites there, I'd say.
Well, and parasite. Sorry, yeah, I see where that's coming from. Actually, no, exactly. That's where they're coming from. Yeah, and that's a difference. That's completely different. So quite right. There is an argument for not dosing all the calves with an anthelmintic, i.e., a worm dose. But no, from a vaccinating point of view, no, vaccinate the whole the whole population.
A similar question there. So is it okay to have vaccinated and unvaccinated calves in the same airspace?
It is, and that will often happen because you'll have young calves who aren't being vaccinated yet, and you'll have older ones. That's absolutely fine. So it's not a problem there, but the whole system will work better if those unvaccinated calves are eventually vaccinated and fall into the system. So it's not going to cause a problem to the unvaccinated calves that some of them are vaccinated, but the vaccinated calves, the vaccine will work better in them if the whole population is protected. Vaccination is more about population medicine rather than about than an individual one.
And if you have used a live vaccine, then but you haven't done all the calves in the same pen, is that increasing the risk? Or
no, not if, in fairness, that's what you'd be doing if you're using Risperdal RSPI3 intranasal. You'd have RSV and PI3, and yes, there's potential for some of those calves to be shedding some of the vaccinal virus, but that's the vaccinal virus which has been attenuated, so that's not an issue. The only time that becomes an issue is if you're a pedigree herd and you're vaccinating calves for IBR. Now, that's a different conversation, and if you are a pedigree herd and you're concerned about getting bulls into an AI station, have a really good conversation with your vet about what animals you are and not going to vaccinate for IBR, because going and vaccinating the wrong animals can be incredibly costly, but that's the one place where it could happen. But I don't want people to go away from this saying, oh, I shouldn't be vaccinating because I might have a bull that goes into the AI station, because that's not true when you're talking about RSV and PI3.
Thanks, Charles. And we have a leaflet on that actually on the Animal Health Ireland website about vaccinate an IBR, and that is one of the questions that came up there. Should you vaccinate for IBR? And you've kind of touched on that. It's probably more for a discussion with, on a one-to-one basis with your vet, if depending on whether.
Well, to be fair, for most commercial farms, if most commercial farms have in place an IBR vaccination program for the adult cows and the heifers, and they start the vaccination program at a young enough age, which I would argue is sometime during the calf's first summer. Calves don't actually need IBR vaccination if they're in a calf shed that doesn't share an airspace with older animals. If they share an airspace with older animals, they certainly should consider it. But otherwise, you would get away with waiting until the calves are at grass, and it could be part of the, it could be done at the same time as dosing or something in July or August or whatever. It could be done at that stage. So, but I would, vaccination programs do change from farm to farm. So yeah, talk to your vet is certainly a good idea.
I might just ask one more question there. It's in relation to a calving pen that's in the calf shed and that can't be changed. How can that be made better for calves?
And in fairness, I remember calving lots of cows in that situation. That's not ideal. So the things that you can do to improve that situation, and that's a classic situation where I'd be arguing that you should be vaccinating the calves for both RSV and PI3 up one nostril, and then vaccinating them for IBR up the other nostril. So those calves do want to get vaccinated for IBR. I'd also have a vaccination program in place for the cows as well, because the reason you're doing that is to reduce the amount of virus that those cows are shedding. Unfortunately, well, it's a fact of life that when cows are calving down, it's a stressful event. Their immune system takes a dip around then anyway. And as a result, a carrier cow is more likely to be shedding IBR or whatever it's carrying at that time. So they're not the best cows to have in the calf shed, if you understand me. But I appreciate we're 3 weeks out. You can't change where you're going to calve these cows. Do you know what I mean? So you're going to have to live with that. But vaccination would certainly help. And again, having solid sides between the calving pen and where the cows are calving down, because remember, calving is a messy business. There's quite a lot of dung flying around the place. You don't want that dung flying into the newborn calves next door. So it's really important that even if you put stock board up on the gates to make sure the muck can't go through. And again, the other problem you have is you're going to have to muck the calving pen out. Again, don't wash it. I would just be mucking that one out, spreading some lime, dry straw down on top of it.
So you agree with spreading lime, then? That's kind of what I was getting at there a while ago when I was on about
sorry,
drying
in that situation, sorry, in that situation would definitely, yeah.
And is there any particular type of lime or?
No,
No.
not
just a drying,
yeah.
And so just quickly, if you have a big shed, and I know there are a lot of big sheds around there, and you kind of alluded to it earlier that you know that we don't need very tall sheds. If it is a situation where sheds are very large and it's cold in there, is there anything that can be done at the climate of the calf or around the calf to kind of heat them? You know, I know you said jackets, but like any kind of make the
jackets I would say are a good investment, and that's one way of doing it. The other thing a lot of people do is put shelves up, you know, the way you put 8x4 boards, have them hinged along the 8 foot side so they can be hinged out of the way. Those will stop downdrafts. That's where they really help. So the thing is, in some of those sheds, you'll find actually quite significant downdrafts, and the calves will lie underneath them. You don't want to make them too high. You only want them about sort of 5 feet maximum above the height of the floor. So, you know, and that could be by, you know, and then having them hinged so that you can actually get the tractor in to muck them out. You know what I mean? So that could certainly help. But sorry to bang on about calf jackets. Calf jackets are cheap. You know, 30 euros for a calf jacket. If you get 2 calves a year out of it, get 5 years out of it, you're only talking about 3 euros a calf per year. 3 euros would only feed a calf milk powder for about a day and a half. Wouldn't even do that. So do you see what I'm getting at? I mean, a calf jacket is cheap. Now, I grant you, there's some work in the management of calf jackets, the washing of them in particular, but actually, I think they're a very good investment.
And 3 or 4 weeks of age, you suggested to remove them.
Yeah.
Does it depend on the weather at that time? I find that can be tricky sometimes.
I would agree with you too, because I mean, you got to look at the weather forecast. Because if it's a miserable day or a miserable week coming up, then they're going to have them they've got to stay on longer, you know, because you know you don't want that. But on the other hand, if we've got a good spell of weather coming up, get them off, and they'll do fine. Because by that stage, you know, they should be eating some creep, and if they're eating some creep, they're beginning to ruminate. If they're beginning to ruminate, they're beginning to generate heat. Because monogastrates, which is what a calf is, don't produce heat. But once they start to ruminate, they become really efficient heat producers. Now, that process isn't really until they're sort of 8 weeks of age normally. But even at 4 weeks, they're beginning to start ruminating a tiny bit, and that's generating heat.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time, but there was one question about washing buckets. Is there any kind of detergent you'd recommend, or?
Hot water is probably the thing, you know, cold water to get the first of the milk off, okay, and then hot water. I've got to confess, I've got no particular disinfectant. The most important thing is actually moving the grime first of all before you use the disinfectant. And this is the same about disinfecting anything, because people talk about disinfectants in calf sheds and everything, you know, when you're in the summertime, when you're power washing them. The most important thing is you get rid of the muck before you put the disinfectant in. So that's removal of the the fat and all the rest of it, which again, rinsing with cold water first and then with hot water is the best way of doing that. And that should be done at least once a day,
Okay. Thanks a million, Charles. Just as you can see, hopefully on the screen there, we have some calf care events coming up around the country in conjunction with Chavasse. So there'll be 4 key kind of topics at these events, and they're located across the country. There are 18 in total. So hopefully there's one near all of you that you could attend. And we would really welcome all Dairy Women Ireland members to attend. They're very informative. You know, it's sometimes there can be a shortage of women at these, and a lot of times it's the women who are feeding the calves. So it'd be great if we could get more women at them. They're starting tomorrow actually, and Charles will be speaking at one tomorrow, and myself in Cork. So if there is anyone with a free couple of hours in the morning, be sure to join us. We've also got lots of other resources there on our website, so don't be afraid to look up. Just to wrap up, I suppose with thanks from all of us in DWI, and we hope you have a good spring and a healthy one. And we are planning a series of farm walks for April, May, so just keep an eye out for those, and they'll be on pasture management. Thanks again to Liam and Charles.
Sorry, Michelle,
yeah.
1 sec. I think we missed a question at one point. I don't know, did I hear it or did I miss it or something? But Pat had a question in. We have cuds of silage in front of the cubicles. Should we do something? Okay, so hopefully Pat is still on there. Yeah, we would see this quite a bit. It's usually caused by acidic silage. So there is probably most likely feeding pure silage with no straw. So the cows are just struggling to regulate their own pH. So they have acidic stomachs really. So if you had a diet feeder and you were using a bit of straw, you could use a bit of straw to help reduce that acidity. Now, what you should never do with pre-calf cows is use sodium bicarbonate or any of those kind of type buffers, because they mess up the DICAD. What you should do then is use a yeast. So a live yeast or something like that to help regulate pH and keep the pH correct. So that's just, we missed that question. I think that's all.
Thanks, Liam. Dedicated to the last. Very good. Did you want to add anything else, Mary? Or?
No, just again, thank you very much, both Charles and Liam, for tonight. It's been very informative. I think we've covered quite a lot, and wishing everybody the most health and success for the 2024 calving season. And we shall see you at another Dairy Women Ireland event in the next few months.
Okay, thanks a million.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Well,